Attention, cannabis consumers. Attention, cannabis consumers.
Welcome to Thoughts Off the Stem. Thank you for joining the sesh with me, Justin Barone. I hope you're having a good day, good week, good month, good year. I hope life's been good to you. I have a serious question for you this sesh episode. A couple weeks ago, I came across some information from some sources within the cannabis industry that some potentially shady things were happening, I guess. I could talk about this now because there's actually been some articles published on this. I'm obviously not, a big investigative reporter or news conglomerate, so I have to be, relatively measured in my response to certain things being told to me, because that's right, I do have sources in the cannabis industry. A couple weeks ago, it was brought to my attention that there may or may not be some products that were going to get recalled because of double dosing. Now, lately, or within, I guess at the beginning of October, there was an article on stratcan.com about these exact specific products. And of course, because like I said, I don't have a huge legal team behind me, and I'm really not trying to get in any kind of trouble, I had to wait until this information came out. So, two of the Potluck Chillos products were recalled at the beginning of October due to excessive variability and exceeding 10 milligram THC limits. That's right. If you don't know what Chillos are like a Zyn. You know what a Zyn is? A Zyn is a little nicotine pouch that you put in between your cheek and your gums, right? Well, this is the same kind of thing, only with THC. So a lot of companies are jumping on making products like this because they're becoming very popular. They're nice and discreet. They're easy to use. They've become super popular. So a lot of companies are trying to produce these things as well. But sorry, what am I trying to say? A lot of companies are trying to produce these products. Not every company is good at producing these products. Okay, so there is a little bit of backlash within the industry for some of the things that some companies are, allegedly doing to get their products noticed on the shelf. Now, there's a couple issues within this whole scenario that I think are sort of the main issues of the cannabis industry. The main issues are that we have providers because here's the thing, if your product's being recalled for excessive amounts of cannabis or above legal amounts or legally regulated amounts of cannabis in that product, you're doing that on purpose, because it's not like you don't know your product has more. Within Canada, the regulations are so stringent that all of the testing you have to do for your product is you're notified right away. You can't be like, oh, I didn't know that this product wasn't, 50% THC when it should have been 10. Like, you know immediately, because there's the testing facilities write you reports that send you the report back that's basically telling you, hey, this is at this level. So you know that you're doing this, okay? That's the first issue within the industry. Publicly traded companies are going to stay away from doing this because it threatens their ability to become be traded on the stock market. It hurts their credibility, right? And it can hurt their overall sales. But if a company is struggling in one area, it is an opportunity for them potentially to be able to grow their sales. And if they're not publicly traded, then they don't really have as big a risk. The risk that they have is the fines, because in Canada, the cannabis industry is so highly regulated, right, that you're very limited in what you can produce in certain areas of like, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to go around it. You're highly regulated in what you can produce in terms of like an ingestible, okay? So Health Canada is the overseeing governing body that decides whether or not you're outside the parameters of what is allowable for sale. Okay, they're the ones that are supposed to trigger investigations into products that are mislabeled, that violate the regulations or the guidelines or the laws. They're supposed to pass on to the AGCO directives to make sure that these products don't make it to the shelf. So the first two real big issues are that you have companies that, because if one company's doing it, I think it's relatively safe to say that there are other companies that are doing it. There may not be noticed yet, right? So it's the first problem is that some people within the industry are trying to skirt the system. The second problem with this is that Health Canada isn't necessarily regulating their number one infraction as quickly as they should be, which kind of throws like a kink into the whole idea that these regulatory processes are what keep the industry flowing or functioning at acceptable consumer level, right? Because the concept behind having products that are limited in quantity are so that the average consumer doesn't have any kind of adverse effect to the product that they're using. So when a company mislabels and overdoses their THC product, so for example, if you have, a gummy that's only supposed to be, 10 milligrams, and your label says it's 10 milligrams, but when you have it tested, it's showing that it's like 50 milligrams, that's a problem. Because then you have someone that may not be as experienced with cannabis coming into a shop, getting what they think is a 10 milligram edible, and they end up with a 50 milligram edible. The adverse effect to that is that you might green out, okay? What I don't think a lot of people realize, or at least think about, or try to mitigate when they're doing these things, because the companies or any company that overdoses their product and then under describes it on a label or tries to keep it within the parameters on that label, they could put some of the public at risk. Because there are new users, there are experienced users, there's a whole slew of users that could potentially have underlying health issues, right? And a higher dosage can lead to a green out. A green out can lead to you having an adverse effect, a bad reaction, and then having issues that exacerbate the underlying health problems that you're having, right? Or that those consumers are having. So it's irresponsible to put out a product like that. The only reason that you would put out a product like that is so that your product sells better. Because people that are buying edibles have to buy multiple packages of edibles potentially to get the end result that they want, right? And new users are going to buy So, okay, let me back up a little bit here. So in Canada, if you're buying edibles, the package can only have 10 milligrams per package, okay? It could be one 10 milligram gummy, or it could be 5 2 milligram gummies, right? But then you have other products like these chillos, which aren't edibles because you don't chew, you don't swallow them, you just put them in your lip like a Zyn or like, a nicotine pouch. Those products can actually have 10 milligrams per pouch for a total of 100 milligrams in the package, okay? So when you're looking and you're trying to like, let's say, for example, you're not a recreational user. Let's say, for example, you're somebody that struggles with anxiety, and it's a pretty common understanding now that cannabis in some forms can help with anxiety. And a lot of people don't want to be to smoke and smell like weed. They would much rather eat a gummy, and then their anxiety it's a calming effect. It takes their anxiety down, and they're able to do the functions of the day. That's quite common, right? So when you get an edible that you think, or an ingestible that you think is 10 milligrams, and it ends up being higher than that 10 milligrams, you don't know what's going to happen. Well, I know what's going to happen. You're going to green out, but you can't think that person is just going to, get home and take that edible. A lot of people, once they leave a shop, will start eating the edible on the way home, smoke their joint on the way home. And if you have somebody that's inexperienced and they're taking these higher than advertised dosages, you can have some serious adverse effects. Like people can freak out. If you've never had a green out, you basically, when you have a green out, you kind of go pale, you get tunnel vision, you might pass out, you might throw up. You don't want that to happen in public. You don't want somebody to have that reaction in public. If that happens, it's better to be at home. So those are the two main issues, right? Is that an under advertised THC quantity can potentially lead to adverse reactions to people that may have underlying health issues. It can also happen for people that don't know they have underlying health issues, and then when they green out or they have this adverse reaction, like I said, it can exacerbate that condition, and the next thing you know, you can have bigger problems, right? So that's issue number one. It's a health issue. It's a consumer issue. We should be aware of that. Issue number two is that Health Canada, from the information that I got, was advised of this happening by people within the industry 5 to 6 months ago. And it seems like that if it's taken 5 or 6 months for articles to be written about, the products being recalled due to excessive THC, that seems kind of suspect to me. Because if your whole game plan is to prevent adverse effects on the public, then should you not react like way faster than you reacted? Products shouldn't sit on a shelf for 5 to 6 months. People are using those products. Now you're asking people to return those products? Let me tell you how potheads work, okay? If you buy weed, that weed's not there tomorrow. Okay, if you buy a pack of gummies, that shit's gone tonight. That kind of deal, especially if you're an experienced user. Now, 6 months later, most people don't have their gummies. Most people don't have this type of product still sitting around their house. So if you're the governing body and it's your responsibility to make sure that the health of the population is, maintained, then this is a slip. Because you can't have these products on that shelf. You can't have that availability for 5 or 6 months. The other thing is that waiting 5 or 6 months undermines your total authority. Because people that are following the rules within the industry are trying to produce and stay within the guidelines and regulations that have been set forth to them by you, right? So you should be all over stuff like this. Like this kind of thing shouldn't hit the market, I don't think. I think this kind of thing should be noticed right away. Now, I don't really know what it takes to notice something like this, but the testing facilities, like you have to have your product tested before it goes to market so that you know exactly what the numbers are, okay? And if you're over the dosage, the legal regulated dosage, if you're over that, you know ahead of time. If you put it out anyway, well, you're kind of being fraudulent, aren't you? Like, that's what I'm thinking. So there has to be some level, I think, this is just my opinion, I think that there has to be some level of like complicity complicity in this situation with Health Canada. Are they just turning a blind eye because they don't want to deal with it, or are they doing it for some other reason that isn't, recognized? We'll say it that way, okay? Because as a regulating body, as Health Canada, as the overseer of Canadians' healthy use of products, you should be all over this, I think. So it tells me that if it's sat for 5 to 6 months, there's kind of a disconnect here. So the question that I have is that should we not then have, maybe there's some other committee of oversight that can be put in place that maybe has better resources, has a better commitment. Because as we all know, governments are, stretched thin, and they don't have the amount of workers that they should have to be able to, jump on cases like this. The other thing I find too is that Health Canada fights a lot of battles over lesser regulations with companies than they do with these kinds of things. And I feel like if this is going to be your platform for being that authority on, cannabis, then this should be number one. If you find out something like this, it should be a reaction that's swift and firm, and that you should be upholding the regulations in a much quicker fashion. That's what I think. And then the third issue is that if the regulations didn't define the numbers as 10 milligrams for edibles and allowed you to have a range of potencies, then you may not end up have this as an issue. Then you don't have the potential for some of these, private companies to attempt to try and do these things with their products. I personally don't feel that the public is in that much danger of having an over like too much THC. I think that what happens, it's not like alcohol. Like you have alcohol, you can die of alcohol poisoning. Nobody's ever died of weed. What they've died from is a relation to another underlying health defect or cause that they've had, that having the marijuana has, exacerbated that. I've said that like 3 times now. Has made it a tipping point for that underlying health issue to become a major health issue or a major problem affecting, what happens next. So I don't think that weed in itself is the issue. I think that the issue is that we have companies, because the dosages are so low and limited, that are trying to circumvent the system to be able to get their product to sell, but also to get recognition within the industry. So this sort of keeping things at this level pushes companies to do wild things to try and get their product to be the product, right? When realistically, you should be able to create a product that's 10 milligrams, and if your product is good, even at 10 milligrams, you'll feel it. You may not be blown out, and most guys will be like, dude, I don't feel it if it's 10 milligrams, so like whatever, I don't want 10 milligrams. So, but if you're paying attention to the high, you'll notice some effect, right? If it's a good product. If it's a bad product, that's probably the other issue with this, is some companies are not making good enough products to stand out within and amongst the variety in that section of availability to compete. So then they're forced to try and up it, because that way the consumer is going to take that and be like, oh dude, that was 10 milligrams? I'm blown out, bro. Whoa. But realistically, it's not a better product. It's a higher dosage product that they lied about, right? So I'm not necessarily against, well, I guess I'm against being fraudulent. I'm against not following the regulations, because it hurts everybody in the industry. It hurts every company, and it echoes across the landscape, right? But that's happening because the regulations are so stringent, and there's a certain section of the public that's like, hey, let me have higher dosages. So if you're Health Canada, and if you're not going to react to this, again, this like really affects how you're perceived. If it takes you 5 to 6 months to react to a product like this that you call potentially harmful, then what are you doing as the oversight? That goes totally against what like your mission is. And it affects the community adversely in the way that you don't want it to. So like, what are you doing? All of that just leads to and adds to the fact that there's a perception that this Health Canada regulating the industry is kind of a facade, okay? And it's not right. If you should, as the regulators, you should be on top of this much quicker. But if this is this kind of thing that's happening and it's going to take you 5 to 6 months, maybe it's time to review the regulations and the potency levels. Because if you buy dry flower, if you buy concentrates, if you buy drinks, if you buy if you buy hash, if you buy any of that stuff, there's a variety of potency. So you can't use the logic that, well, we're protecting people. Why are you protecting people from gummies and not everything else then? If you can have a set of joints that ranges from, let's say, 10% THC to like 60% THC, then why can't you have edibles that range from 10 milligrams of THC to 50 milligrams of THC? It seems ridiculous. And like I was about to say, there is a section of the consumer community that wants that ability. They want to be able to buy 100 milligram edible or 100 milligrams of edibles in a package. They don't want to have to buy multiple packages and spend a shit ton of money on getting high. They want to be able to do it affordably, right? And gummies is the only place, gummies and drinks are the only two places where there's a limit on the THC, which is bullshit, because you should have people in the industry like bud tenders, shop owners, and what do you call them, like reps, company reps, sales reps, that inform the customer of what they're taking, so that you as the bud tender in a shop can figure out what the consumer wants, learn what the consumer is using it for, learn what their sort of what it may conversely interact with. Conversely? No. what it could affect, like what medications the customer may be taking. And it's their job to help the customer find the suitable product, right? So it doesn't make sense that at a gummy you can only have 10 milligrams, because if you have a new consumer, the bud tender should know that, hey, I'm going to give you a lower dosage so you can go low and slow and just ride that out. If you meet an experienced consumer, then you want to be able to provide that consumer with higher dosages. Because I know for me, I need to take 100 milligrams of edibles before I'm in that pocket of excitement and enjoyment, right? If I eat 10 milligrams, I might notice a little bit, but it's not the same. If I want a certain effect, I need 100, okay? And most consumers are saying that. They're like, well, these edibles are too low. I can't have this. Why can't I have that? Why can't I be able to go in and buy 10 milligrams of this or like 1,000 milligrams of this? It's all because Health Canada wants to regulate it and keep the population safe. But there's a hypocrisy here. The hypocrisy is, one, they don't react quick enough. Two, there's multiple other products that are way higher dosages. So like, what are we talking about? This is a weird, ironic inconsistency in the industry. And it creates more of a problem than just whether or not the public is going to, potentially have adverse effects. It creates a problem within the industry itself and the producers and providers, because then you have providers that are skirting this and trying to do this with products, and the overseeing body saying like, I don't care, until provinces, other industry people in the industry, companies start squawking about it and saying, hey, look, we don't stop it, and it takes Health Canada that to do it, or it takes that influence on Health Canada to do it. That's ridiculous. We should have a committee that is dedicated to dealing with these things if that's going to be the regulations. Okay. So that's my thought on that. But I'm also, as a consumer, I'm also like, yeah, we should have, we should be able to buy products. We should be treated like adults. As consumers, we have a responsibility to educate ourselves and understand what we're doing. Okay. Industry, as somebody that was involved in the industry, we have an obligation as those industry, knowledgeable industry professionals, to make sure that whoever comes into our shop is educated properly on what products they need, what products they use, why it is, and what it is, right? So that's what I wanted to know this week. I want to know what you think of this. I know a lot of people are probably going to say like, oh, I don't care, just give me the higher dosage. But we have to be responsible with it. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have the higher dosages. We should definitely have the higher dosages, I think. I just think there's a glaring gap in what what Health Canada says and their actions. And there's a glaring gap in what the producers are doing versus what they should be doing. Not all of them, some of them. Okay, and I'm not trying to call anybody out, but I'll put the article from stratcan.com on a link to it in the show notes, and I'll put it on tots420.com so you can read it. Yeah, I think that the industry, at least from the perspective of Health Canada, is a little bit hypocritical in what they're doing, because you have a variety of products in most of what's available to you, except for ingestibles. Like you can get an oil that's 100 milligrams. So I don't know. It seems very silly. It seems hypocritical, and it seems like there isn't a high level of commitment to actually following through on the claims that Health Canada says it. The claims that these are the reasons for the regulations. Seems a little bit suspect to me, and I think maybe it's time 7 years in to maybe think about another way of oversight, because I think we're doing pretty good, and I think overall we're doing pretty good, but I think at the 7-year mark, you have to start listening to the consumers and what the consumers want, and I think there's a big enough cry or a big enough push for people to from people that want the higher dosages. And I think that it's an adult business, it's an adult industry, so it's controlled substances. So you need to be able to accept the fact that we're adults. We should be able to educatedly pick what we need. So that's what I think. I want to know what you think. Do you think Health Canada dropped the ball on this? Do you think that it matters? Do you think that we should have a different committee of oversight? Do you think that there's a better way to handle the industry in general? What do you think? Let me know. But yeah, those are my thoughts off the stem for this week. I hope you enjoyed the sesh. Hope you come back next week with me, Justin Barone, on Thoughts Off the Stem on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Google, Anchor. Nope, not Anchor. iTunes, Good Pods, Podchaser, Pandora. Everywhere you get a podcast. It's out there, baby. Till next time, keep your lids low.